Breaking news here on Wells Fargo. Of course, reports earlier today that they may have been ready to settle with the SEC and the DOJ, and indeed that has happened. They've agreed to pay $3 billion, which will settle three different issues to resolve criminal and civil investigations into that sales practice as dated back to 2016 when it first became public. It will also involve a deferred prosecution agreement in the criminal matter. So this does tie together three outstanding issues hanging over Wells Fargo for a fee of $3 billion, adding to about the roughly total of $4 billion they paid over the course of the last 4 years, and probably going to be taken as relatively good news by the stock. It was, of course, up on these reports today when all of the other banks were down, and I think would probably cement that gain over the course of the weekend. Scanning through the release, which has just hit, no sign any clear announcement on what they're thinking in terms of charges towards individuals. Don't forget, the OCC has had civil charges to individuals. We don't know about anything further, but there are some relatively clear criticisms in this release about individuals saying despite knowledge of the illegal practices, community bank senior leadership failed to take sufficient action. But overall, this $3 billion payment resolves all three outstanding matters with the SEC and the DOJ, includes a $500 million civil penalty that will be distributed to investors by the SEC. Of course, the big outstanding punishment remains the Fed asset cap, and remains to be seen as and when that'll be lifted, but unlikely that this would have been the Fed asset cap could be lifted until this is done. It's adding 0.5% or so of gains in the aftermarket to the 0.5% or so of gains that it had today in the session. Charlie, what's your take as to whether this allows the company to fully turn the corner going forward?
Yeah, you said relatively good news. I dropped the relatively. I think this is very good news, and I think this has been a long time in the headlines. This has taken a long time. It's been an overhang on the brand. Branding matters in this business. So I think any settlement is good news. As I mentioned before, it's a $200 billion market cap company. A $3 billion fine is not that big a deal. I look for the stock to be up more than 0.5% tomorrow.
Oliver, what's your take in the valuation of Wells Fargo as it stands, compared to its own history, compared to the others?
Well, it's obviously been cheap, and yes, this is an overwhelming positive for the investors in Wells Fargo and for the bank itself, because it kind of puts the matter largely behind them. And that's important because it gives visibility. And, I agree that a 1.5% of market cap fine isn't the end of the world for the bank. It's still a lot of money. We don't own the financials, generally speaking. We're very much underweight just because there's so many issues with a balance sheet that doesn't have transparency. And not just Wells Fargo, I'm saying in general in the sector, that we tend to stay away from them.
Alicia, I want to get your thoughts on this news, especially given the fact that we're going into a weekend where Berkshire Hathaway is going to have their meeting and their earnings, and this has been, and I realize that they've been cutting back on their holdings, but this has been a key holding.
Right. So, it looks like it's a great value here just because that fine does not really feel like it was very punitive, to tell you the truth. On that size bank, it feels like they did pretty well. It's a great outcome. And also, there's been a lid on the stock valuation-wise because of the headlines, because of the news coming out there. So this is really probably the green light for it, as long as the yield curve doesn't stay inverted for so long, right? That's the real issue out there, what's happening in the bond market. But this certainly, for this stock in particular, is a good move.
I also just, another sentence I picked out in terms of that question on individuals, still a quote from Inspector General Mark Balek saying, quote, "Our office is committed to bring to justice those who deliberately falsify and fabricate bank records in order to deceive regulators and the public." So again, just wondering what happens still going forward. No particular comment in this press release about what the Department of Justice is thinking about potential charges against individuals on the criminal side. The civil side we've already heard from last month. But the stock now at 1.7%. And again, already had about a 2% or so outperformance today on reports of this news relative to the rest of the bank sector. So clearly being taken as positive. We're also just getting a statement now from Wells Fargo itself. Charlie Scharf, Chief Executive Officer, saying, "The conduct at the core of today's settlement and the past culture that gave rise to it are reprehensible and wholly inconsistent with the values on which Wells Fargo was built. Our customers, shareholders, and employees deserve more from the leadership of this company. Over the past 3 years, we've made fundamental changes to our model, our program, leadership, and governance. While today's announcement is a significant step in bringing this chapter to a close, there's still more work to be done in the trust that we lost. We're committing to all necessary resources to ensure nothing like this happens again. I would just bring up the point, we discussed it a little bit earlier, Charlie, in terms of the timing of all of these settlements and the progress that seems to be happening from the regulatory side, clearly does, at least whether coincidentally or not, sync with the change in CEO. So Charlie Scharf has come in and clearly wanted to get this behind him. Similarly, according to the Wall Street Journal report earlier today, Tim Sloan, the outgoing CEO, did take part in conversations with regulators. So whether that's got anything to do with it, it's happened at the same time that regulators have got things behind them. And clearly this settlement, the market's taken well.